Hi there and welcome to the Lifestyle Accountant Show. I'm Meryl Johnston, your host, and this podcast exists to help today's accounting firm owners build successful firms while also living a healthy, happy life without sacrificing sleep, your weekends, or time with loved ones. On today's episode, we are talking about Natalie's experience working remotely, then signing a lease and moving into an office, and ultimately deciding to end that lease and move her team back to 100% remote. We'll dig into the challenges and lessons learned along the way.
Yeah, definitely in the early years, in the beginning, you're like, oh my God, what have I done? Have I made the biggest mistake of my life? And then when it all just starts to roll, you're like, I can do this. This is going to be a really successful business, and now we're now 6th year. So we're almost coming up to the same time I was in my other firm, which is absolutely crazy.
Our guest for today is Natalie Lennon, a chartered accountant and registered tax agent with over 20 years experience working with various small, medium and multinational businesses. She's the founder and director of Two Sides, a boutique firm in Sydney's South. Natalie's mantra is to work smarter, not harder. During today's episode, we discuss her experience leaving the firm where she had started her career and grown into a role as partner, and then going out and starting her own firm. The challenges of hiring hybrid team members compared to 100% remote roles, and Natalie's experience in posting a job ad and the interest that came from accountants and bookkeepers who wanted the 100% remote roles. We talk a little bit about Natalie's experience building team culture in both a remote environment and an in-office environment. And then we have a bit of fun talking about pricing, value-based pricing, fixed fee pricing in the context of the accounting industry. All that and more coming up on the Lifestyle Accountant Show. This podcast is brought to you by TeamUp, helping you to recruit rockstar Filipino accounting staff without the ongoing BPO fees, and Anature, Australia's leading e-signature provider. I'll be sharing more about my experiences with these products later in the show. Hey Nat, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Meryl. I'm happy to be here.
I was going down a little TikTok rabbit hole before we started recording. I know that you're on TikTok. I thought I'd better do some research, better check it out. And it looks like you've created a ton of content there. And I saw tradies and travel deductions, 83,000 views, Aussie directors and directors ID, 22,000. So it looks like you're having some success over there.
Definitely. But the weird thing is that sometimes I'll post a video and think, oh, this one's going to go viral. And I get, maybe 1,000 views. And then I post something that I think, oh, this is not going to do very well. And it just goes absolutely ballistic. So it's just like, I guess there's a few factors, which is what the content is, when you post it, who's online at the time you post it. And yeah, maybe just a bit of luck as well.
Well, good on you in creating that content and getting some consistency and some views. I had dabbled in TikTok a little bit last year, but I didn't have much success. I was talking about some crypto Web3 stuff and scrapped it after a couple of weeks. Maybe I needed to be a little bit more persistent.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that takes time. And even like if I have a little break from it and I jump back in, it takes a while to get the views up again. It's a bit of a weird, I guess, the algorithm, as they say. It's a bit weird how it works. Definitely keep at it. But yeah, I guess you've got to look at, your ROI, don't you?
Yeah, exactly.
Being an accountant, it's all about ROI.
Absolutely. So we're here today to talk about remote work, working from an office, and your experience with that. And I have some of my own views as well. But before we start down that path, I'd love for you just to share a bit more about your background with the audience.
Sure. So I won't go right back to the beginning because it's a very long story, but in a nutshell, didn't know what I wanted to do when I left school. I just knew that I wanted to start working and buy a car. So I went off and worked and was just doing, some reception, office admin, and then learnt some accounting, doing some some payables and receivables in MYOB, really liked it. So decided that was what I wanted to do, and then went off and studied. So studied part-time while working full-time, which, has its pros and cons. Then went into public practice, into a small chartered firm, worked my way up there. Then, I guess as most young juniors, wanted the money, went into commercial for a little bit, then realised it was a bit of a boys' club and was a bit boring. I missed the clients and the complexities of tax. So then I jumped back into to chartered. And at this stage, I was my late 20s, so I was 28. And it just so happened that I was employed by a firm where the founding partner was about to retire. So within 6 months, I became a 40% equity partner, which was, when you're 28, it's all very exciting. And I probably didn't do the due diligence that I should have. But I always say everything happens, for a reason. And then when that founding partner retired about 5 years later, I thought, okay, this is my chance to really, it was like an 80s firm. A lot of the things were done the way they had always been done. And in that, 5 to 6 years, they didn't really change too much. We made a few changes here and there, but by and large, they didn't really, think that the 28-year-old had any say in what was going on, even though I was a 40%, owner. So I guess then I was getting a bit frustrated and I was wondering, there's got to be more to life than this. I was sitting in an office all day, every day, doing the same old stuff. And then we were using, Xero and learning about some of the other apps that the clients were using from the clients and their bookkeepers. And I thought, you know what, it's either now or never. And so then I decided to start Two Sides and go out on my own.
And what was that process like in terms of just making the jump, deciding to leave the firm? Was there much involved in unwinding the partnership and then starting, I suppose, was it a competitor that you were offering similar services?
Yeah, so the firm that I had joined wasn't in my local area. It was probably about, 30 minutes away. So I guess, back then when accountants were sort of very local, this is back in, 2017 before the work from home was a big thing, I guess they didn't really see it as a competitor, but the whole process was not a fun one. They weren't too impressed that I decided I was going to leave, even though at that time I only wanted to take a small parcel of fees. So I had a list of, what I wanted to take. And I think from memory, it was only about 60K worth of fees that I wanted to take, the really good big group clients. And in my mind, I was like, well, I'm going to go, I'm going to take these fees. They're not even my partner's salary. So, you guys would be better off without me type of thing. And I think they realised all the work that because I was doing a lot of the practice management type of role that they weren't, so good at. They were probably on the tools a little bit more. So I think they realised all the things that I was doing. And I will never forget it. As soon as I said that, they basically told me to get out of the office, didn't want me there. Then they started trying to ring clients behind my back. And that day before I left, the other partner said to me, "You'll never make it on your own. I don't know what you think you're doing." And that has stuck with me since then. And that's always in the back of my mind. Every time I'm trying to grow and do all these things, I'm just like, well, you know what? You were wrong. You were wrong. Yeah. And then you're trying to unravel, obviously, the financing and all that sort of stuff. That was not a fun time either. Lots of lawyers' meetings and, stressful phone calls and all of that stuff. Yeah.
And are there any lessons coming out of that? If you had advice for another young accountant who was looking at coming on as a partner, are there any things you could put in place, I suppose, before signing the contract or?
That's a really interesting question. And I think the problem is when you're in that moment of signing that deal, you're really I sat down with my lawyer and went through it and he was like, what about this and what about that? And I was like, I don't really care. I just want to be a partner and that's all just a piece of paper. So definitely listen to, the legal advice you get. Definitely push for what you want because, on the other end, if it's not done correctly, it's not going to be a fun time.
Your story, interestingly, sounds like another woman that I know who also became a partner quite young in a firm with older men, also ran a lot of the practice. They did a lot of golfing and and she did a lot of the operational business side of the running the team or in doing the systems. And then her voice didn't feel heard, and she eventually left and set up on her own. And many of the clients moved across because she was also managing a lot of the work. And that was an interesting experience for her about not feeling valued because she wasn't bringing in sales because she wasn't networking in the boys club, but actually the clients valued her, the relationship. So slightly different, but it really, hearing your story really reminded me of that story.
Yeah. Yeah. And definitely probably another key nugget from that I left out was definitely if you do the right thing by the clients, it'll come back around. So for me during that time, as I said, they were ringing clients behind my back, whereas I was very forthcoming with these are the clients that I want. And so when the other partner called some of the clients, they basically said, oh, Natalie's leaving. We're going to be looking after you. Nothing changes, blah, blah, blah. And they rang me and I told them exactly what the other partner had done. And they were like, oh, we're coming with you. Even some clients that I hadn't worked on for years. So doing the right thing definitely pays off.
Absolutely. I think my lessons hearing that are doing the right thing, communicating early, and also valuing yourself, particularly if you're a young accountant coming through the ranks of, believing in yourself and valuing yourself. So you started two sides. You had some clients that came across with you. Talk me through what that first year was like.
Well, it was interesting because when I first made that decision, I went home and told my husband, and he always supports me. And my attitude was, well, we've got some savings as well, and we'll be fine for 6 months to a year. And if it doesn't grow, doesn't work out, I'll just go get a job. There's plenty of work as an accountant. It's not going to be hard. But what I found was that the clients that came with me were very eager to refer and to see me succeed and do well. So, in the first year, we more than doubled the revenue. Actually, I think it was I just made a note here so I wouldn't remember. It was almost triple. So, and then we had to hire someone. First hire was just a junior to help me with some admin, and then we had an offshore team member. And when I had the junior admin, she was coming to my house, and that wasn't really working. So I decided that it was time to go into a co-working space. So then we moved out of the home into the co-working space, which went from part-time desk to full-time desk, and then we moved into an office there. And then as we grew, we hired more people. But yeah, definitely in the early years, in the beginning, you're like, oh my God, what have I done? Have I made the biggest mistake of my life? And then when it all just starts to roll, you're like, I can do this. This is going to be a really successful business. And now we're now 6th year, so we're almost coming up to the same time I was in my other firm, which is absolutely crazy.
It is. It's funny hearing you talk about the kitchen table, and I had that as well.
Yeah.
With team member coming around and we'd be working on something together. And I even had a client do that. The client was from overseas, and I felt a bit unprofessional sitting around I was in a share house at the time.
Oh. I think growth-wise in Newcastle has a very similar story that I heard a long time ago. It's very humbling, isn't it, to go, back to the kitchen table?
It is, and I think you forget that sometimes. I'm almost coming up to 8 years now with Bean Ninjas, and this was a business before that. So sometimes it's easy to forget the things that you did just to hustle and to make it work. There's a lot of effort, I think, in getting something off the ground. And sometimes when you've got momentum now, where it's not as hard to get a new client, or you've got a reputation and people want to come and work for you or with you, I think it's quite different. But I do like to go back and remember some of the sacrifices or the things you used to do.
I was having coffee with anyone that wanted to have coffee. Any business owner, any financial planner, any lawyer. And look, some of those meetings, I was like, why did I just waste my time there? But they do come full circle later on. It's all those little seeds that you plant, and then, it grows. I think in that first year too, I was able to go to the gym a lot. So I was like the fittest I've ever been because I had a lot of time. I look back on that and sometimes I think, life was much simpler back then.
So it sounds like when you started your business, you had a little bit of office space that was flexible with the co-working space.
Yeah.
You also had an offshore team member quite early on. And so how were you managing that dynamic of having some in-person interactions with your team and then also having someone that wasn't there in person? How were you thinking about things like culture?
Yeah, look, that was pretty simple in the early days because really it was just an admin person in the office and then the person that was offshore was doing all the compliance work. So it was sort of a bit siloed, I guess, in that sort of time. And then when the offshore person left at that stage, we then had enough money to hire onshore. So then we grew the onshore team. So we didn't have that hybrid at that time. So then we grew the team to I think maybe 5. And then we went back offshore just before COVID hit and like maybe 2 months before COVID hit. And then when COVID hit, we decided the offshore wasn't going to work for us for various reasons and we brought it back onshore. So there's been, as you would probably know, in a fast growing business, there's lots of things that are changing all the time and trying to work out what works and what worked yesterday might not work tomorrow. And it's, all those things are happening. So yeah, I guess in that time, there wasn't really a lot of culture type of things being done for the offshore, onshore. Obviously, when we're all onshore, we're doing a lot of things for culture. So, we go do bowling and we go out to dinner or to lunch and do all those sorts of things. And I guess now that, which we're going to get into in a minute, going to fully work remotely, we've got to really focus back on that culture piece because when you're in the office, it's a bit different. You're seeing each other every day and there's not as much effort, I guess, that needs to go into that.
This podcast is brought to you by TeamUp, helping you to recruit rockstar Filipino accounting staff without the ongoing BPO fees. We've had Filipino accountants on the Bean Ninjas team for about 4 or 5 years, but my experience with BPOs has been average at best. When COVID hit and our BPO team moved to remote work, we started to question the value of paying an ongoing monthly fee for every team member, particularly as we had a couple of years of experience now working with an offshore team and no longer needed all of the support that a BPO can provide. TeamUp provides fixed price recruitment with no ongoing fees. It costs around $3,000 for them to run the end-to-end hiring process. That starts with creating an attractive job ad, promoting it on multiple platforms, attracting hundreds of candidates which they vet and interview and test, and ultimately they present the top 3 candidates for you to interview. We've just hired our first accountant in the Philippines with TeamUp. The process took about 5 weeks from beginning to end and saved our manager in the Philippines hours and hours of time. It's a busy time of year for us and constantly hiring was taking her away from other valuable work like reviewing client files and also managing our team in the Philippines. TeamUp also offers an employer of record service through their partners, and that takes care of the compliance side of things. So next time you're looking to hire a rockstar accountant in the Philippines, check out hireteamup.com. That's HIRE, teamup, TEAMUP.com. Now let's hear from one of our sponsors, Anature, Australia's leading e-signature provider. I've used a range of different e-signature solutions over the years. At one point, we had 3 or 4 different DocuSign accounts floating around at Bean Ninjas, which had been set up by different team members. Sometimes we had a bunch of documents that needed signing, and at other times we didn't. And as an accountant, it annoys me to pay for something that we weren't always using. When I heard that Anature had simple pay-as-you-go pricing and they understood the accounting industry, I had to check it out. It was super easy to set up an account and send out my first agreement for signing. Bonus, it meets the identity verification standards of the ATO and Tax Practitioners Board. So next time you are looking into an e-signature solution, give Anature a go. I'd like to segue a little bit from, I believe at some point you moved from the co-working space into your own office space, which is that where you are now with the podcasting setup?
No. So, yeah, just, I love change. You can see that there's just been like my poor team just has to go along with. I think it also comes from being in a firm where my business partners wouldn't listen to me and let me do anything. So then when I went out on my own, I was like, oh, I've got all the power. I'm just going to, if I want to make a decision, I'm just going to do it and run with it. And if it's wrong, then, whatever, we'll deal with it. So what happened was we were in the co-working and someone was moving out of their office, which was up the hallway, into the co-working. And so we had a bit of a look at it. It was a small office, and we decided at that stage we were ready. There was 5 of us, sitting in a very small room. It was hard on the phone and it was getting a bit noisy. And so we thought, let's make that jump. So it was really just, wheel everything down into the co-working, and that the fit out was done. So really we didn't need a lot of investment. We just had to buy some furniture, which I think we just got all cheap desks from IKEA to start with. And then as we had the money, we replaced them with, big girl desks, as I like to call them, proper grown-up desks. And then we almost grew out of that office. And it was sort of just after, I think, the first lockdown. And, obviously there's a lot of office space going very cheap. And we were like, well, if we can get something that's, not going to cost us an arm and a leg, and we had a bit of the cash flow boost money in the bank that we didn't need at that stage. So let's move to a bigger office and fit it out and do it exactly the way, that we've always wanted. And it was great and I loved it. But now fast forward 3 years and clients are not wanting to come back to the office. Team members are not wanting to come to the office. So we've made the decision to, which we're actually giving the keys back this afternoon after this recording. It's the very last recording in the podcasting studio. We just made the decision that, why are we paying all this money on rent? We're not really using it. So it's time. So we've sort of come a bit full circle, I guess, going back to work from home now. Yeah.
So interesting. And so did the vibe change in the office over time? It sounds like you had it for about 3 years. And I mean, it sounds amazing having the fit out that you wanted yourself, having the team all together in this amazing space. So I'm interested to dig into that a bit more and hear what it was like and your thought process of deciding to end that and have everyone go back to remote.
So I think after the second lockdown, we all couldn't wait to get back into the office. I couldn't understand why all these people were staying to work from home. We were missing each other. We were like, let's get back into the office. It was all a great fun time. But I think it's that whole you want what you can't have type of deal. So then towards summer, we thought, well, let's go and do a bit of a hybrid work from home so that everybody can enjoy their summer. And selfishly, I wanted that too. So, I didn't want to make my team be in the office while I was working from home by the pool. I didn't think that was really fair. And then, over the last couple of months, we've just been coming in less and less. And everybody just prefers that. And every time we try, like we just hired a couple of new people, and the difference between trying to get someone to do hybrid or someone to work from home is like hundreds of applications. It's absolutely ridiculous that nobody wants to come and work in the office. So I guess it's twofold. It's, trying to get talent and having that talent pool be quite larger, and also, giving the team that sort of balance to be able to work from home and put the washing on and, take the dog for a walk and do all those things. And also I think when I made this decision, my husband was like, oh, you finally got the office you've always wanted. And I said, I think sometimes you have to get things to realise you don't really want them. You know what I mean? I felt like I always wanted to prove, to my ex-business partner, to myself, to everybody that look at me, I can do this, look at my fancy office, yada, yada. And now I'm like, I don't really care. I don't care for it anymore, Yeah.
I think you need to experience it yourself. It's like when your parents tell you something and you just ignore it and you have to go make the mistake or experience it yourself, and then you can reflect and decide whether it is right or not.
Yeah.
It's actually interesting what you were talking about with hiring. So were you saying when you changed the job ad, so if it was 100% remote, that's what people really wanted, but if it was even hybrid, so still the ability to work from home some days, but some days in the office, there was just not the same interest?
Yeah. And I also think because we're not in the city, so we're about 45 minutes to an hour out of the city. So we're in the suburbs. So obviously the talent pool is a lot smaller as well. But just to give you an idea, we did a job ad just before just before December or the end of December last year for a remote bookkeeper. Obviously it's a bookkeeping role as well, but we got over 600 applications. Then we did a hybrid role in January to try and just see what we would get there. And I think we got maybe 30. So and look, a lot of people say, well, how many of those were actually good? And yes, there's a lot of junk in there, but still the level of applicants. And I speak to, other, business owners, accountants, and they just no one can really get staff to work in the office. I guess some of the bigger firms in the city will always get the people working in there in the office because people want to work in the city and have that, sort of lifestyle. But yeah, just not working for us. And that's not to say it might not work in the future. But for now, it's definitely, we definitely get more of a talent pool and we do work from home.
And I think that's an interesting lesson for anyone that's listening who's finding it hard to hire at the moment. Have you considered having a 100% remote role? Because if that's what accountants and bookkeepers are showing, that's what they want. But I see a lot of chatter in the accounting groups of, well, we do hybrid or we have set days in the office, set from home. I don't want someone putting on a load of washing under my watch. I think actually that's what people, if you can't hire, maybe it's time to adapt a little bit or at least consider how can you have a competitive advantage as in attracting people. And this podcast season is all about remote work and I'm a big advocate. I love 100% remote and having all of that flexibility and giving my team control over their schedule. But there's also challenges around that. I think specifically around team culture. You mentioned this earlier. You don't just have the interactions of just sitting across from someone and having a chat and what are you up to on Friday night. So what are some of the ways you think about that? Or I know you're in the transition at the moment to remote. So how do you think you'll keep some of that team culture and that feel?
Yeah, so during COVID, we obviously went above and beyond for everybody. So we were doing, daily huddles on Zoom, but we would get a bit carried away and sometimes it'd be an hour and a half and we'd be like, okay, we've got to stop chatting now and get some work done. We did some online yoga. We did all kinds of things, but I think during COVID it was sort of a different time. So now what we do is we do a Monday morning, everyone hops on, we have a Zoom check-in, and then, sort of the day-to-day is mostly just a bit of chatting in Slack, like good morning, how was everyone's weekend? So a bit of a quick chat in there, and then we're hopping on Zoom quite a bit throughout the day, for things that we need. So we do a little bit different to, I guess, I've listened to, for your team work from home, it's very flexible, whereas ours is a bit more rigid. We're still, 8:30 to 5 with a little bit of flexibility in there. So everyone's on at the same time. So that makes it a bit easier to just hop onto Zoom. And that's sort of our main communication. So we normally would message on Slack and be, hey, I need help with XYZ. Have you got some time now? Can we schedule it in? And we just hop on Zoom like that as if we would, in the office. And then, I'm working on some different things as to what we're going to do regarding team building and all those types of things. And that really depends on our next hire, because at the moment we're all in Sydney. So it depends on whether the next hire just happens to be in Sydney and we can all meet up, or whether they're interstate and maybe we don't do it as regularly as I'm planning.
Would you go back to the offshore team? I know you'd mentioned you'd tried it a couple of different times and it wasn't working. What didn't work for you and where are you at with your thought process there?
So we actually do have someone offshore at the moment, but the issues that we have, and we're just looking at whether we're going to keep that role or bring it back onshore. I think the problems that we always have is, number one, the time difference. So at the moment they're in India. So I think they don't log on till about 1:00 in the afternoon. So then there's a bit of a time lag between them hopping onto work and sending queries. And obviously my problem is that I'm a workaholic, and so if I get an email from them after hours or on the weekend, I want to get it done so that it's just done and I don't have to worry about it the next day. So that's my biggest problem, is I feel like I'm then working much longer hours to try and keep the work flowing so that there's no delays. That's probably the biggest thing. Obviously the quality of the work too, I feel like it's just never no matter how much training you do, no matter how many we have checklists galore. We are proceduralized to the hilt, and it still doesn't replace having English as your first language and being trained in Australia. It's a good stopgap. Like, it's helped us at the moment with resourcing, because we had a whole lot of clients we needed to get done before the 15th of May deadline. We just couldn't with the team that we had. But yeah, I don't know. It works sometimes, doesn't work other times. Like I said before, what works today might not work tomorrow, and we're still trying to figure out, what works for us. We haven't got all the answers.
So next up, I've got some rapid fire questions for you to get your perspective on these different topics that are, I think, relevant to the accounting industry. So the first one is timesheets, and whether you have them, whether you like them, don't like them. What do you think?
Yeah. So when I first started, I was like, no timesheets, I'm not doing these. And then when we hired our first employee who was offshore, I worked out that I needed timesheets to work out if he actually A, knew what he was doing, and B, could meet the budgeted time. So we've never gone back to no timesheets. So I'm definitely, we do fixed fee, but then we have the timesheets to monitor how we're going to budget. And I think that's very important.
Yeah, I like the idea of no timesheets because I never liked them myself. But I still like the data that comes from timesheets. So we're still timesheets too. So next up, daily huddles. Do you do them? Why not?
So our daily huddle, like I was saying before, is just done in Slack. So basically they'll just go in and we'll have a little, good morning, and they'll say, these are my 5 priorities I'm getting out today. And if they need help with anything, they'll flag it then, so that then we can obviously schedule some time. And I think that's really important too, because if things come in from clients, overnight, and we need to know where to slot them in. And because we do have a small team, obviously I'm still heavily involved in, the resource planning and those types of things.
That's one of the challenges we have, because we have that flexible schedule, is around, the people that you need online at the same time doesn't often happen unless you schedule it. So it can cause delay, that we don't have the same speed to, if something comes in that needs a quick response. So that's one of the downsides of the flexible schedule.
Yeah.
The bookkeeping services arm of your business, I remember hearing somewhere that was a loss leader for the business, and interested in if that's still your approach or if things have changed with that.
Look, yeah, I definitely have said that a couple of times over the years. We have increased the rate over the years, so it's no longer a loss leader, although we don't probably make as much money off the bookkeeping as we do the end of year compliance, because the way we cost out the bookkeeping is basically hourly rate, and that's how we do it in the engagements, whereas the fixed fee end of year is more, your end of year is going to cost X. We don't actually say, it's so many hours by this rate, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, definitely not a loss leader anymore. And I think if you're an accounting firm and you're not doing bookkeeping, I think you should definitely have a look at it. If you're a smaller firm, I think, for us, that's where the majority of our leads come through, is people looking, for a bookkeeper, or they go to a bookkeeper and the bookkeeper says, I don't have capacity, or I don't look at those, micro clients. Some of our bookkeeping clients are just a couple of hours per month, and we do them monthly, rather than, I think a lot of accountants just jump in, do the bookkeeping and the BAS at the same time, which, we've got live data these days. I don't think we need to be waiting 3 months.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
That was Beanage was a bookkeeping only business to start with, and then we gradually added service offerings. And one of the reasons we did that was because I was predicting that all accounting firms would be adding bookkeeping, just because it made sense to me that if you could have clean data, then preparing, it's just some tax adjustments to do the tax return if the balance sheet's reconciled. And then also this was probably 5 years ago, I was thinking about this, but if you want to do advisory, I was predicting, or management accounting.
You need the data.
The clean data, you need it standardized, charts of accounts, that kind of thing. And I was predicting that there'd be a bit of a battle between bookkeepers and accountants of who was going to do that advisory, and whoever controlled the bookkeeping was probably going to be in a better position for that. It hasn't played out exactly how I thought, because I think some accounting firms have done bookkeeping and then thrown it in the too hard basket and not scaled it the way I was predicting. But do you have any thoughts on if an accounting firm does want to do bookkeeping, how to avoid some of the common problems?
I think bookkeeping traditionally done by either bookkeepers or accountants is very different to the way we do it. So the way we do it is we do it similar to like a month end. So if you work in commercial and you do the whole month end close, we don't do a full set of work papers like you would do in commercial, but we do it like a month end close. Whereas I feel like a lot of bookkeepers just log on whenever and they do bits and pieces, and the client says, well, I don't know where everything's at. I don't know, what they're doing when they're doing it. Whereas ours, they know we're going to log in by a certain time of the month, then we'll email them their queries, then we get the queries, we send them the reports, we close, we're doing the BAS. So it's all very regimented and proceduralised, whereas I feel like, the bookkeepers don't tend to think that way. And then the accountants is even more haphazard. They're just getting in there and allocating things, and they're not really... they're not using, the apps like HubDoc or Receipt Bank. They're not knowing how to reconcile with Afterpay or Shopify or all those types of things. So I think, if you're going to do it as an accounting firm, you need to really sit down and have a structure around it. Don't just go, oh, we're going to be doing bookkeeping now, and when the client comes in, someone just jumps into the file willy-nilly, because they're not going to really know what they're doing. And they're also going to need a bit of training, because accountants doing bookkeeping, and even I'll put my hand up, when I first started Two Sides, I thought I knew zero, and I learned quite quickly along the way that there was a lot of things I didn't know that I had to, skill up.
I think that commercial background is invaluable if you've got an accountant doing bookkeeping. I've spent some time in commerce as well and learned month-end close and just internal management reporting. And I actually think that the firms I see that have scaled it well often have someone that's come from, I actually like to hire people with public practice background who then have spent a bit of time in commercial roles. Yep. And for me, they make the best leaders for a bookkeeping team.
Yeah, because you understand the business side of things too. You're not just, I guess a lot of accountants just look at it at the end of the year. So they're not seeing the day-to-day, that's going on. They're looking at it with a different lens.
But if you just hire someone from commerce, then the fast pace of public practice and the need to get things done fairly quickly on a time budget, that hasn't worked for me. A few mistakes there. Next up is pricing. I think you've touched on this, that you have fixed fee and for tax, and then hourly for bookkeeping. Do you think about value-based pricing, and how do you factor that in or not?
There's a couple of things that we do value-based pricing on. So that would be like our BASs. We just have a fixed fee for the BAS. But then in the background, we still have to have a budget of what we think it's going to take. And then we've got, our zero setups. They're all done at a fixed fee. A couple of other things. But I don't know, I just still think the value pricing works to an extent, but if you're doing timesheets to measure it, you still need to have in the back of your mind the hourly rate. Like I feel like there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of the value pricing, I think.
I agree. I've never found a way to scale it. So I'd say what we do at Bean Ninjas, it's fixed price. We have fixed prices for everything, apart from catch-up jobs where we'll often bill in a bundle of hours just because it's harder to predict. You find as you explore, then you discover the mess.
Yes.
And you need an ability to charge for that.
Yep.
But so prior to Bean Ninjas, I tried value pricing where I'd kind of discuss with the person, what do I think the value is? Okay, me and my little team are replacing an internal finance role. Okay, I think they'd pay 60 or 70,000 a year for that. Okay, that's what I'm going to pitch the price. And it was very individualized, but I just couldn't see how to do that at scale with a lot of, if I didn't want to handle sales anymore. And then also if you have clients talking to each other, which happens, we're in an industry niche, so all the clients all know each other. Then if you price someone quite differently to someone else because you do value-based pricing, then I can see that coming back to bite you as well. Why am I paying double of what my mates pay?
Well, and I feel like the clients need a bit of transparency as well. So they want to know, how that's happening. And I think, like you just said too, if you want to scale and get someone else to help you with the sales. So for us, having that fixed pricing that has the hourly underlay rate, my practice manager does all the quoting in Practice Ignition and then sets up all the work in Carbon with the budgets. So if I was doing the value pricing, it's a bit hard for her to be doing that. I would then have to get more involved. Yeah.
Well, Nat, thanks so much for coming on. It's been a fun and wide-ranging chat. We've covered lots of topics. Do you see yourself ever going back to an office? Is it remote, here to stay? Where do you think things will be with Two Sides in a couple of years' time?
Oh, look, I don't know. And as anyone listening will be like, she's all over the place. She changes things more than she changes her underwear. So I'm going to say never, But for right now, like I think this is where we're at. I think we moved into the office, I guess, like most people starting a new firm, felt like that was what we needed to do to be, legitimate and professional and all those things. And I feel like through COVID, it's opened opened people's eyes about doing Zoom and not necessarily needing to see their accountant face to face. So it's paved the way, for us to give this a go again. And yeah, never say never. Depends on the team and the growth and all the rest of it. But yeah, for right now, it's definitely, I think, where it's at for us.
And how will you feel this afternoon handing those keys back?
Yeah, look, I think relief and obviously a little bit of sadness. It's the office that I always wanted. I put a lot of effort into, fitting it all out. But I think the extra dollars in my bank account will make me feel better.
Got a trip planned?
I do actually. It's my 40th in January, which I know is a long way away now, but we're planning to go to the Maldives. So, yeah, definitely every extra dollar that we can get in the bank account from not paying rent will be helpful to pay for that trip.
Fantastic. I've been on a couple of surf trips to the Maldives and it's amazing. So I'm waiting until I can either sneak off on a trip without the kids or wait till they're old enough.
Yeah.
Oh, enjoy.
Nice.
Well, Nat, if any of our listeners want to get in touch with you or learn more about what you're doing, where's the best place for them to reach out or connect with you?
So I'm on all the socials at Nat Leno, Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, also on Facebook, but probably the easiest places are the other ones. If you wanted to email me, Natalie at twosides, which is twosides.com.au, be happy to, have a chat with anybody about any of the things we've been chatting about.
Thanks so much, Nat. It's been great.
Thanks for having me.
It was so good to have Natalie on the show and hear her share her journey of building Two Sides and her experience in working both remotely and from an office. A couple of the biggest takeaways for me were hearing about the modern challenge of hiring people who want to come into the office. It's got me thinking about what this means for the industry. It seems like there's demand for accountants and bookkeepers who are looking for 100% remote roles. But what does that mean in terms of training new staff? And what does that mean in terms of things like team culture in 5 or 10 years' time? I don't know the answer to that, but it's definitely something I'm interested in thinking about. It's always fun hearing about the early stages of building an accounting firm and some of the sacrifices that are needed. And I enjoyed hearing about Natalie's transition from being a partner at a more established firm to starting her own. One of my favorite things about the interview was hearing of Natalie's willingness to try different things, to move something and test it. And the underlying theme of this podcast was about her willingness to try both working from an office and then to end that and move to 100% remote. But I also found it interesting hearing how Natalie kept culture and team engagement even when they moved from that in-office environment to a remote environment. If you'd like to connect with Natalie and find out more about Two Sides, check out the show notes. And if you'd like to get in touch with us directly or find out more about the podcast, head on over to lifestyleaccountant.co.